The day began like any other at the Alien Academy, but for one human it would mark a turning point she would never forget. The academy was vast and imposing, filled with towering structures and polished stone floors that reflected the strange, shimmering light of the alien sun. Students of every species moved through the hallways with purpose, their eyes sharp and expressions confident. Yet in the middle of this bustling place, one small human stood out. Not because of power or skill, but because of her quiet presence, her small frame, and the unmistakable air of vulnerability that surrounded her. The instructors had been observing her for weeks. They had noticed her hesitance in physical exercises, her careful, measured words in lessons, and her refusal to engage in petty fights that other students found entertaining. To them, she seemed weak, unworthy of respect, and an easy target for mockery. In a place where strength and intimidation were prized above all, her quiet nature was seen as a flaw, a weakness to exploit. It was during morning assembly that the plan was revealed. The students were called to the central hall, a massive space with high ceilings and balconies that allowed everyone to watch the events unfold. The human girl was escorted into the center, her hands slightly trembling at her sides. The crowd, sensing the opportunity for entertainment, began to murmur, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and barely restrained laughter. The instructors smiled subtly, knowing they had orchestrated the perfect spectacle. She was made to stand, alone in the middle of the hall. The alien instructors circled her slowly, their eyes sharp and calculating. Each step was designed to make her feel smaller, to press her into a corner of fear and shame. They whispered to each other in clicks and hisses, commenting on her weakness as the students above leaned forward, eager for the show. The human looked up briefly, meeting a few curious eyes, and felt a rush of anxiety. Her heart pounded, but she did not move. She did not protest, and she did not cry. She simply waited, taking a deep breath and centering herself as best she could. Then came the cubs. Predator cubs, young but deadly, were released into the hall from large cages at the far end. They were half-trained, sleek, and sharp-toothed, their glowing eyes scanning the hall for signs of fear. The crowd erupted into laughter and cheers. Everyone expected the human to scream, to stumble backward, to beg for mercy. This, they thought, would be her undoing. The cubs, sensing the expectation, moved with calculated interest, their claws scraping against the polished floor as they prowled closer. The girl felt a shiver run down her spine. She had been taught about predators in theory, had seen images and holograms of such creatures in her studies, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of these animals moving toward her in a space too small to escape. The air was thick with tension. Every eye in the hall was on her, waiting for the moment when she would falter. The cubs circled, their growls low and menacing, tails twitching as if sensing the crowd's excitement. Yet she did not panic. She did not run. She did not scream. Instead, she focused on her breathing, steadying herself against the fear that threatened to overtake her. Every instinct screamed to flee, but she knew that fear would not help her here. The cubs were watching her just as much as she was watching them, testing, evaluating, curious in their own way, and in that moment, a strange thought crossed her mind. Maybe, just maybe, she could reach them in a way the crowd could not understand. The instructors nudged the cubs forward with subtle gestures, expecting the girl to crumble. They whispered commands, clicks, and hisses meant to provoke, to coax the predators into attacking. But the girl held her ground. She kept her eyes focused, her hands relaxed at her sides, her body calm. It was not defiance born of pride or strength. It was a simple, human stillness, the kind of quiet that demanded attention without raising a voice. The crowd began to murmur uneasily. The human had not acted as they predicted. Their laughter faltered as they leaned forward, squinting to see the girl's reaction. The cubs hesitated, their movements slowing, their ears twitching as if sensing something different in her. They sniffed the air, their growls lowering, but they did not leap. The instructor's subtle smiles faded as they realized the plan was not unfolding as intended. Time seemed to stretch. The human girl and the predator cubs stood in a delicate balance. The cubs circled, each step deliberate, testing the boundaries. The girl's heartbeat echoed in her ears, yet her posture remained steady. She lowered herself slightly, a gesture that was neither fear nor submission, but calm acknowledgement. The cub's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, they hesitated in genuine curiosity rather than instinctive hunger. Some students gasped quietly. They had never seen a human so composed in the presence of predators. Others whispered to each other, unsure if the girl was brave or foolish. The instructors exchanged anxious glances. Their well-planned humiliation was slipping through their fingers, replaced by something entirely unexpected. The girl's mind remained clear. She remembered the lessons she had learned about animals, about trust, and about patience. She recalled the advice from an old mentor. Fear is contagious, but calm is stronger. And so she stayed still, radiating quiet assurance rather than dominance. The cubs, one by one, slowed further. Their instincts battled with their curiosity. They sniffed closer, noses twitching, eyes wide, sensing that this human was unlike any other prey they had encountered. The crowd shifted, the tension thickening. Some students laughed nervously, unsure if the spectacle would continue as planned. Some leaned closer, drawn by the strange magnetism of the scene. The instructors tried to whisper commands again, urging the cubs to attack, but the animals resisted, tilting their heads and growling softly, uncertain. And then, a subtle change occurred. One of the cubs, the smallest and youngest, lowered its head slightly, sniffing at the girl's hand. She did not flinch. Instead, she reached forward slowly, her fingers brushing the creature's fur lightly, offering neither threat nor fear. The cub sniffed again, then stepped back, its stance cautious but unaggressive. It was a tiny moment, almost imperceptible, but it shifted the energy in the hall. The other cubs, sensing the hesitation and trust between the human and the first cub, paused as well. The crowd, sensing the unexpected calm, quieted. The instructors' frowns deepened. Their lesson in humiliation was failing, unraveling before their eyes. The girl took another slow breath, maintaining her composure. She realized that this was her moment. She could not fight with fists or weapons, but she could demonstrate something far stronger: presence. In the midst of anticipation, mockery, and fear, she became the anchor, the calm center that even the predator cubs could not ignore. Minutes passed like hours. The predators circled, the crowd held its collective breath, and the instructors muttered, in frustration. The girl's strategy was simple: remain still, remain calm, and allow the cubs to approach on their own terms. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cubs began to mirror her calmness, their initial aggression melting into cautious observation. By the time the first cub lowered its body to sit near her desk, the hall erupted in murmurs. The laughter of mockery had faded. The human girl, the one everyone expected to collapse, now held the attention of every creature and student in the room. She had not raised her voice. She had not struck. She had not fled. And yet, she had claimed their respect in a way that no one could have predicted. The instructors were livid but powerless. The lesson they intended, a display of weakness, fear, and humiliation, had backfired. The girl's quiet courage had altered the dynamics of the room entirely. What had been designed as punishment had become a test of spirit, and the human had passed in a manner no one anticipated. Even as the assembly ended, whispers spread quickly. Students recounted the scene in hushed tones, how the human had stood still, how the cubs had hesitated, how calmness had turned potential violence into a delicate balance of trust. The story would not fade quickly. In the weeks to come, it would be retold, not as a moment of fear, but as a demonstration of courage, patience, and the unexpected power of human presence. In that moment, in the vast, echoing hall of the alien, Academy, a lone human, had not only survived a test meant to humiliate her, she had begun a quiet legend. The predator cubs, half-trained and fierce, had unknowingly chosen a leader, and the first threads of trust had been woven into what would become a remarkable bond. The day's lesson was clear, even if the instructors refused to admit it. Strength was not always about claws or intimidation. Sometimes it was about stillness, trust, and the courage to stand alone in the center of fear. And as the girl walked out of the hall, small and unarmed yet undeniably present, the predators followed her gaze. They had been released to intimidate, but they had found something far more compelling: a leader. The moment the predator cubs entered the classroom, the atmosphere changed entirely. The chatter of the students faded into a tense silence, replaced by low growls and the clicking of claws against the polished floor. The cubs were young, but sharp, their movements agile and precise, each step measured and deliberate. Their eyes glowed faintly under the alien lights, scanning the room for signs of weakness. Their teeth flashed as they snapped, testing the air, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. The human girl remained seated at her small desk, hands resting calmly in her lap. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, the anticipatory energy of students and instructors alike pressing down on her. She knew the cubs were supposed to terrify her, to make her scream or stumble. That was the plan, and everyone in the room was eager for the spectacle. The other students leaned forward, shouting insults, taunting her with cruel words designed to break her composure. "Look at her!" one jeered. "She's too weak to even stand!" another cried, but she did not flinch. Her gaze lowered, not in submission, but in steady calm. She breathed slowly, allowing the fear to settle rather than control her. She had learned long ago that panic was contagious, and that strength often came from control rather than force. The more the cubs prowled around her desk, growling and snapping their jaws, the more she centered herself. Her pulse raced, but her face remained calm, her body relaxed, almost serene. The predator cubs paused as they circled her. Their instincts told them to attack, to respond to the nervous energy they sensed in the air. But the humans' calmness confused them. There was no sudden movement, no quivering limb, no scent of terror to trigger their aggression. Their ears twitched, noses flaring as they sniffed her presence, sensing something unfamiliar, a quiet stillness that did not align with the fear they expected. One cub stepped closer, cautiously sniffing the air near her desk, while the others hesitated behind it, growls softening into quiet observation. The students noticed the shift immediately. Their laughter faltered. The snickers turned into whispers. The jeers softened into uncertainty. "Why isn't she scared?" one student asked under their breath. "She should be panicking," another murmured. The room, once alive with mockery, now held its collective breath. Even the instructors who had orchestrated the scene to humiliate her frowned in frustration. The plan was unraveling before their eyes. The human's calmness was deliberate, but it was also instinctive. She understood, in some deep, unspoken way, that fear would not protect her here, nor would rebellion. Instead, she remained present, acknowledging the cubs without threat or provocation. She did not try to dominate them, but she also did not shrink away. She allowed her stillness to speak for her, to communicate a sense of control that was quiet but undeniable. The cubs, sensing the unusual energy emanating from her, slowed their circling further. They sniffed the air, occasionally snapping at nothing, as if questioning their own instincts. They had been trained to respond to fear, but here was a human who offered none. Their young minds and animal instincts were conflicted. They were curious yet cautious, drawn to her presence but unsure how to proceed. The crowd's confusion grew. Students who had once jeered now whispered nervously to each other. The instructors tried subtle gestures, urging the cubs to attack, to press the human into submission, but the animals resisted. Their instincts battled with curiosity, and the human's calm presence continued to disrupt the expected flow of events. The room, once a theater of humiliation, was now a stage of suspense. Minutes stretched on as the cubs circled, inching closer and closer to her desk. She lowered her gaze slightly, as if acknowledging their presence without fear or aggression. Her hands remained still, resting gently on the edges of the desk, not reaching for anything, not threatening them. The cubs paused again, their ears flicking, eyes scanning, sniffing the faint scent of calm that seemed to emanate from her. Some students began to murmur among themselves. "Why isn't she scared?" one whispered. "Do you think she's controlling them somehow?" another asked. The murmurs grew into a low hum of curiosity as the laughter that had filled the room moments before faded. Even the instructors' expressions tightened. Their carefully orchestrated display of dominance was failing, replaced by something none of them had anticipated. The human took another steadying breath. She had learned long ago that animals, especially predators, could sense emotions in ways humans could not. They reacted to energy and intention more than words or gestures, and so she remained calm, her mind focused, radiating an energy of quiet strength rather than fear. She did not flinch when a cub's teeth snapped just inches from her hand, nor did she recoil when another brushed past her desk, claws scratching the floor. The cubs continued their circle, and one of the younger ones took a small step closer, sniffing at her fingers. She lowered her hand slightly, allowing it to hover near the cub without making contact. There was no sudden movement, no threat, only a gesture of calm recognition. The cub paused, nose twitching, eyes wide. Slowly, cautiously, it lowered its head, investigating this human who did not react with fear. The other cubs watched. Their growls softened into low rumbles as they assessed the situation. The human's stillness seemed to influence them. They began to mimic her calm behavior in their own way, slowing their movements, observing rather than attacking. The room was silent now, save for the soft shuffle of claws on the polished floor and the occasional low rumble from the cubs. The students stared, spellbound. The human who had been mocked, laughed at, and expected to break down was instead commanding attention, not through power or force, but through presence. Her calmness was magnetic, compelling even the predator cubs to hesitate. They had been released to terrify, to provoke panic, but they were now uncertain. The human girl had disrupted the natural order of the trial, turning fear into suspense and mockery into awe. The instructors tried one last time to regain control, clicking and hissing commands to the cubs. The animals paused, heads turning toward the sound, but their focus remained on the girl. They had sensed something different in her. Not weakness, not fear, but an unusual stillness that neither threatened nor provoked. Their instincts, honed to respond to fear and aggression, were confused. The human's calm had become a force more compelling than their training. By now, whispers had spread through the students. "She's controlling them," one murmured. "No, she's not controlling. She's influencing them," another corrected. The laughter of mockery had vanished completely, replaced by a tense anticipation. Everyone in the room was waiting, watching, unsure of what would happen next. The human's quiet defiance had turned the expected spectacle into a scene of unexpected suspense. The human remained seated, breathing steadily, eyes lowered but aware of every movement around her. The cubs circled, sniffing, snapping occasionally, but none leapt to attack. They tested her presence, sensing the calm energy she radiated. Each step they took was cautious, measured, hesitant. The mockery that had been aimed at her was failing to provoke a reaction. Her calmness was unshakable, and it influenced the cubs, slowing their aggression and planting the first seeds of trust. The moment stretched longer, and the girl's mind remained clear. She understood that fear could not protect her, but quiet, strength could. She did not shout, she did not strike, she did not try to dominate. Instead, she simply existed in the center of the room, letting her presence speak louder than words. The predator cubs, confused by her calm, began to circle more slowly, one stepping closer than before, nose twitching, eyes wide and curious. By the time the assembly drew to a close, it was clear that the human had survived the mockery without yielding. The cubs had hesitated, their aggression softened by her steady presence. The students left the room in hushed tones, talking quietly among themselves about the unexpected display. The instructors were left frustrated, unable to explain how their carefully planned humiliation had failed. For the human girl, the trial had become something more than survival. She had discovered a quiet power, one that did not rely on force or intimidation. Her calm had influenced the predator cubs, making them hesitate and observe rather than attack. And in that simple act, she had begun to change the way the room perceived her, from a target of mockery to a figure of unexpected strength. She rose from her desk slowly as the hall emptied, the cubs watching her every move. Their growls had softened to low rumbles, their curiosity palpable. She had not raised her voice, she had not shown aggression, and yet she had claimed the attention of every creature in the room. The mockery had failed. By the end of the day, whispers spread about the human who had faced predator cubs without fear, who had turned expected humiliation into a quiet, commanding presence. What had been intended as a punishment had become a lesson in patience, calm, and unseen strength. She had survived, not by fighting, but by standing still and showing the power of composure. The cubs, half-trained and fierce, had been brought in to intimidate, but they had found something far more compelling. A human whose quiet courage challenged their instincts. The predator cubs circled the human girl like restless shadows, their low growls vibrating against the polished floor of the Alien Academy's classroom. The students watched with a mixture of anticipation and glee, expecting the young girl to finally crumble under the weight of the trial. The air was thick with tension, every movement amplified by the silence that had overtaken the hall. The instructors had planned this carefully. The cubs were hungry, young, unpredictable, a perfect setup for humiliation. But the girl remained calm, seated at her small desk, hands resting quietly in front of her. Her gaze was soft but steady, and her breathing even. She had learned long ago that animals, especially predators, could sense emotions more accurately than words could convey. Fear was easy to detect, aggression even easier. But calmness? That was something rarer, something that could shift instincts in ways unexpected. One of the cubs, slightly larger than the others, stepped forward. Its claws clicked against the floor, and its nose twitched as it sniffed the air around her. Its eyes, bright and intelligent, seemed to study her very essence. The other cubs slowed their circling, sensing the change in their companion. There was curiosity now where there had once been only hunger and aggression. They had expected panic, trembling, or a sudden move that would trigger the attack. Instead, they found stillness. The girl raised her hand slowly, allowing it to hover in the space between herself and the cub. She did not reach to touch it suddenly, did not make any sudden gestures. There was no weapon in her hand, no intention to harm, only a gentle offering, a silent message of trust. She exhaled softly, letting the calmness of her presence fill the space. The cub sniffed her hand, pawing the floor cautiously. It was a tentative movement, testing, learning. One could almost see the conflict in its eyes. Hunger pulled it forward, instinct demanded an attack, yet some subtle sense, something unnameable, restrained it. Slowly, its body relaxed, just slightly, head lowering in an unspoken acknowledgement. The other cubs watched this unfold. Their growls softened into low murmurs, the tips of their tails flicking in curiosity rather than agitation. The human girl had not commanded them. She had not forced compliance, yet she had done something remarkable. She had shifted the energy in the room. Fear and aggression were no longer dominant. Calm and trust had begun to take root. The students, who had moments, ego been jeering and mocking, now exchanged uncertain glances. The laughter died on their lips. Whispers filled the air. Did she tame them? One wondered quietly. No, not tame. She's connecting with them, another corrected. They could not explain it, and neither could the instructors. The plan had been simple: instill fear, provoke chaos, humiliate. Yet the results were nothing like anyone had expected. The first cub, now confident enough, pressed its nose gently against the girl's hand. She did not flinch. She did not recoil. Her fingers curled slightly in acknowledgement, a subtle, calming gesture. Slowly, another cub edged forward, sniffing and exploring the space near her desk. The girl's calm radiated like a quiet wave, touching even the wild instincts of these young predators. The bond formed silently, without words. There were no declarations, no dramatic gestures, only the gentle interactions, the soft breathing, and the shared understanding of stillness. The cubs, once ready to attack, now accepted her presence. Their bodies brushed against her desk, their eyes meeting hers briefly in a moment of mutual curiosity. The hall, once alive with anticipation of violence, fell into a stunned hush. Even the instructors who had orchestrated this scene of humiliation were momentarily frozen. Their eyes flicked from the girl to the cubs, disbelief etched into their faces. They had expected fear and chaos, but what they saw instead was a quiet harmony forming in the center of the room. One could almost hear the collective intake of breath as realization settled over them. The human girl had shifted the balance entirely, and not with force, but with calm presence. Time seemed to stretch as the girl allowed the cubs to settle around her desk. One pressed its body against her chair, another rested near her feet. She did not push them away. She simply existed alongside them, a human amidst predators who had been trained to provoke terror. And in return, the cubs did not attack. They acknowledged her, hesitated, and then slowly accepted her presence. The students leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide. The human they had mocked, the one they expected to break and run, had instead created something extraordinary. Even their whispers reflected awe and confusion. She didn't flinch, one murmured. And they're following her, another whispered. It was unprecedented, and no one in the hall had seen anything like it before. The human girl, aware of every gaze and every movement, maintained her stillness. She let the cubs sniff and explore, allowed them to circle gently, always careful, not to startle them. Her calm was steady, a silent communication that no words could convey. It was not domination, it was presence. It was a quiet force that transformed fear into observation, aggression into curiosity. The cub's body language shifted noticeably. Their ears, once pinned back in readiness to strike, were now angled forward in interest. Their tails, previously swishing with tension, were relaxed, brushing against the floor. The initial instinct to attack faded, replaced by a cautious acceptance. Slowly, they began to form a loose circle around her desk, their attention focused entirely on her. The laughter of the onlookers dwindled into silence. The mockery that had fueled the event evaporated, replaced by a growing fascination. The human girl's calm had commanded attention without a single aggressive act. Her presence alone was enough to influence the instincts of the predator cubs, shifting their behavior from chaos to quiet acknowledgement. The instructors, frustrated yet intrigued, tried subtle cues to encourage aggression. A whistle here, a gesture there. But the cubs ignored them. Their attention was fixed on the human, their instincts tempered by an unexplainable awareness. The girl did not need to command. She did not need to fight. Her silent confidence was already shaping the outcome. Minutes passed, and the bond solidified. The cubs nestled closer, their bodies brushing against her desk and chair. She extended her hand again, gently, and one of the cubs sniffed it, then lowered its head slightly, a gesture of acceptance. Another followed suit, moving closer, drawn by the calm presence she radiated. The hall, once filled with the expectation of chaos and mockery, was now a space of quiet observation, where the power of stillness and trust had replaced fear. The students could not look away. The human they had intended to humiliate had become the center of attention in a completely different way. She had taken control of the room, not through force or aggression, but through patience, calm, and the quiet strength of her presence. They watched as the cubs, creatures trained for dominance and attack, had chosen her side voluntarily, forming a circle of tentative loyalty. The girl, still seated, took a slow breath. She was aware of the risk, of course. These were predators, after all. But she had learned to respect their instincts without challenging them. By offering trust and remaining calm, she had invited them to respond in kind. It was a silent pact, unspoken but deeply felt. By the time the trial ended, the hall was filled with whispers of astonishment. The human had survived the public test, not by fighting, not by fleeing, but by connecting in a way that no one had expected. The predator cubs had become allies in spirit, forming a silent bond with her that was visible to all who watched. The mockery had failed, and in its place arose something far more compelling: respect, curiosity, and the beginning of trust. As the students filed out, many glanced back, unable to comprehend fully what they had witnessed. The instructors, too, left with unspoken questions lingering in their minds. How had a lone, unarmed human managed to influence the instincts of trained predator cubs? How had calmness and presence turned expected fear into voluntary protection? The girl remained, seated quietly, surrounded by the cubs who now observed, her without hostility. Her hands rested gently on the desk, her eyes soft and steady. She had survived the mockery, yes, but she had done more than that. She had created a silent bond, an unspoken understanding that would remain, shaping the relationship between human and predator for all the trials yet to come. In that simple act of calm, patience, and trust, she had rewritten the rules of the academy, proving that strength was not always measured in force, but in the quiet courage to stand still, to offer trust, and to command respect without intimidation. The cubs had chosen her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through presence and calm, a lesson that no mocking crowd or harsh instructor could ever erase. And so the public trial, meant to humiliate and break her spirit, became the first step in something far greater, a moment where a human girl, small and unarmed, became the silent alpha in a hall of predators, her quiet bond with the cubs speaking louder than any scream or act of violence could ever have done. The classroom, once filled with jeers and the expectation of chaos, had become a different kind of arena, The predator cubs, initially released as instruments of humiliation, had chosen to stay close to the human girl, their bodies pressed lightly against the edges of her desk, their bright eyes never leaving hers. What had been planned as a display of weakness was turning into something remarkable, something the instructors had never anticipated. The alien instructors, growing impatient, with the failure of their plan, stepped forward. Their movements were deliberate, authoritative, meant to intimidate. They had expected obedience from their predators, but instead, the cubs began to growl deeply, their tails lashing with tension. Every instinct in the young animals screamed at them to protect the human. It was as if they recognized her not as prey, not as someone to humiliate, but as a leader, someone worthy of their attention and loyalty. The girl remained seated, calm, her hands resting lightly on the desk. She did not raise her voice, did not shout commands. Instead, she whispered softly, her words gentle and steady. Her voice carried an unusual authority, not one of dominance, but of understanding and empathy. The cubs responded immediately. They turned their bodies, forming a protective semicircle around her. The instructors, caught off guard, froze as they realized that their attempt to reclaim control was failing. Each cub positioned itself strategically, one at the front, blocking the path to her desk, another at the side, keeping watch on the nearest students. Even the smallest cub, initially timid and hesitant, pressed close to her chair, tail flicking with alertness. Their growls rose in unison, a warning that was impossible to ignore. The instructor's movement slowed, uncertain, as they tried to calculate how to proceed. The girl's eyes moved slowly from cub to cub. She whispered again softly, and the animals shifted slightly, following her cues. It was a dance of trust and understanding, a silent communication that no human voice could replicate. She did not have to threaten them. She did not have to act with force. Her calm presence, her patience, and her quiet confidence were enough to guide them. They were listening, obeying, and protecting not out of fear, but out of loyalty, a loyalty she had earned through her presence alone. The hall of students, who had been watching with amusement and anticipation, were now silent. Their mockery had evaporated, replaced with awe and disbelief. The human girl, small and unarmed, had done what none of them thought possible. She had turned the predator, cubs into guardians. What was meant as a lesson in weakness had become a display of leadership, subtle, quiet, and immensely powerful. The instructors, though frustrated, could not ignore the scene. They had trained these cubs for obedience, for aggression, for entertainment, but the girl had something they could not command: trust. The cubs were responding to her not because of intimidation or fear, but because she had reached them on a level deeper than instinct. She had recognized their intelligence, their curiosity, and their need for connection, and in return, they recognized her as someone special, someone to protect. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. One of the instructors, stepping closer, attempted to nudge a cub away from her desk. The cub's growl deepened, low and menacing, teeth bared without snapping. It stood its ground, muscles tense, body poised to defend. Another cub mirrored the stance, blocking the other side. The instructors froze, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. They had underestimated the bond forming in the center of the hall. The girl did not flinch. She extended a hand slowly toward the nearest cub, brushing it lightly. Her touch was gentle, reassuring, and the cub lowered its head in response, allowing the contact. Another cub mirrored the action, stepping slightly closer while keeping a protective stance. She whispered again, barely audible, yet the cubs responded instantly, shifting positions in perfect coordination. They were no longer wild, uncontrollable beasts. They were disciplined, attentive, and fully aligned with her presence. The students, observing the unfolding events, could hardly believe their eyes. The girl they had expected to cower, to cry, or to flee was now the center of control in the room. She had achieved what no one else had. She had transformed fear into loyalty, chaos into protection, and mockery into respect. Even the instructors, masters of manipulation and training, could not alter what had formed naturally between the girl and the cubs. The air in the hall seemed to hum with tension and awe. Every growl, every flick of a tail, every cautious movement of the cubs reinforced the fact that the girl had become the center of authority, not through violence or threat, but through patience and presence. The silent bond she had nurtured had reached its peak. The predators were no longer instruments of intimidation. They were allies, companions, protectors. Slowly, the instructors realized they could not push any further. Every attempt to separate the cubs was met with resistance, not from aggression alone, but from a shared understanding between the girl and the animals. The cubs had made a choice. They had decided that she was their alpha, their leader, and they would not leave her side. The hall that had been meant to shame her now bore witness to a powerful, unspoken lesson. Leadership was not always loud. It was not always forceful. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and rooted in trust. The girl's calm remained unbroken as she looked around the room. She acknowledged the students with a gentle nod, not to command, but to share a moment of understanding. The cubs responded in kind, their heads lowering, eyes following her movement. They were attentive and protective, yet not hostile. They had chosen her side, and nothing could dissuade them. Even the other students, some who had been the loudest in their mockery, began to sense the shift. Their laughter and whispers fell silent as the reality of the situation sank in. The human they had expected to embarrass had not only survived the ordeal, but had risen above it, claiming loyalty where fear had been intended. They could see it. The subtle but undeniable truth. The girl had the power to inspire respect and trust, and the cubs were the living proof. The instructors, unable to force obedience from the cubs, reluctantly stepped back. Their plan to break her spirit had failed. Spectacularly, in its place something unexpected had formed, a bond that transcended instinct, a connection between human and predator that could not be commanded, only earned. The girl's strength lay not in weapons, not in loud defiance, but in her quiet, unwavering presence, and the cubs had recognized it instantly. As the lesson drew to a close, the cubs continued to stay close to her desk. The girl whispered to them softly one last time, and they shifted positions slightly, always attentive, always protective. The hall emptied, but the memory of what had transpired lingered. The human girl had been claimed by the cubs, not through force, but through patience, presence, and an unshakable heart. By the end of the day, it was clear to all who had witnessed the scene. Something remarkable had happened. The girl, who had arrived timid and small, had become the silent alpha in a room full of predators. She had turned mockery into respect, fear into loyalty, and humiliation into a lesson in strength. The cubs had claimed her, and in doing so, they had revealed the true power of calmness, empathy, and trust. The hall, once a place of ridicule, had transformed into a space where quiet courage held dominion. The girl's claim over the cubs was not just an act of survival, it was a statement of principle. Leadership was not always about aggression, it was often about stillness, patience, and understanding. The cubs' loyalty was a testament to this truth, a living, breathing demonstration of her unexpected authority. In that moment, the human girl had rewritten the rules of the academy, not with force or anger, but with heart. The predator cubs had chosen her as their own, and nothing the instructors could do would undo the silent, unbreakable bond she had formed. Her strength was subtle, her authority quiet, but it was absolute in the eyes of the cubs. And so the claim was complete. The predator cubs had made their choice. They had identified the human girl as their alpha, their trusted leader. What was meant to humiliate her now stood as a testament to her quiet power, a story of courage and connection that would be remembered far longer than any lesson of fear the instructors had intended. The human girl had been claimed, not by force, but by respect. The cub's loyalty was hers, earned through patience, presence, and unwavering calm. And in that loyalty, she had found her greatest strength. The events of that day did not remain confined to the walls of the Alien Academy for long. Whispers traveled from one hall to another, from one class to the next, until the story of the human girl and the predator cubs spread like wildfire. What had been planned as a scene of ridicule became a tale of astonishing courage, and every student, instructor, and visitor soon knew the name of the girl who had changed the rules simply by standing still. Inside the academy, the atmosphere shifted. Where once mockery had dominated the classrooms and corridors, now there was a quiet reverence. The predator cubs, who had been unleashed to intimidate and terrorize, were no longer tools of humiliation. They had claimed their own leader, and that leader was a human girl. She moved through the halls with the cubs at her side, each step purposeful and calm, every motion observed and mirrored by her loyal protectors. Their fur brushed lightly against her legs, their tails swaying gently, signaling alertness without aggression. The students who had once jeered found themselves at a loss. They stared as she walked through the classrooms, a picture of serene authority. Her gaze was steady, her movements unhurried, yet there was a weight to her presence that commanded attention. Even those who had mocked her could not help but notice the difference. The girl they had expected to crumble was now the center of control, and she radiated a quiet strength that the cubs recognized instinctively. Wherever she went, they followed, forming a living shield around her, but doing so in a way that was natural, almost protective in tone rather than menacing. The instructors, many of whom had designed the ordeal to humiliate her, were equally stunned. Their carefully laid plans had unraveled before their eyes. They had underestimated the power of calm, empathy, and trust. The cubs, trained to obey only commands of force or threat, had instead obeyed the gentle guidance of someone who had nothing to wield but patience. Their loyalty was not bought with fear. It was given freely, and in that, the girl had achieved what no force could accomplish. She had earned genuine allegiance. In the days that followed, the girl became a symbol within the academy. The predator cub's behavior set a new example for the students. Other humans and aliens alike began to observe her approach. The quiet confidence, the calm in the face of danger, the respect for life and instinct that she displayed. Even the cub's natural playfulness, their energy and curiosity, was channeled in her presence. They no longer acted out of chaos or hunger, but mirrored her patience, her empathy, and her ability to remain composed under pressure. During lessons, the cubs would sit near her desk, observing attentively, occasionally nudging her hand if she lingered too long on a single task or if she appeared distracted. Their actions were subtle but deliberate, a form of guidance and companionship rather than dominance. The other students, initially skeptical or frightened, began to follow her. Example, they noticed the power of calmness over fear, of patience over aggression. Slowly, a culture began to emerge within the academy where understanding and respect held as much weight as strength or intimidation. The human girl never sought to dominate or intimidate. She never gave harsh commands or demanded loyalty. Instead, she moved with a quiet presence, allowing the cubs to act according to her subtle cues. A slight turn of her hand, a gentle word, a nod of acknowledgement. These were enough to direct them, and they responded immediately. The cubs had become extensions of her will, but not because they were forced. They had chosen her, and in choosing her, they had made her their leader. Outside observers who came to witness the Academy's training were equally amazed. They would watch in awe as she walked through the corridors, the cubs moving seamlessly around her, sometimes playful, sometimes vigilant, always attentive. They were a living testament to her influence, proof that leadership could arise from presence, empathy, and patience, rather than fear, coercion, or power. Stories of her calm authority spread, and soon, even the alien elders spoke of the human girl with a mix of astonishment and respect. The day that had begun with humiliation and mockery had transformed into a defining moment of unity. The cubs, once instruments of cruelty, were now companions and protectors. The human girl, once timid and overlooked, had become a beacon of quiet strength. The Academy, long a place where hierarchy and power determined influence, now recognized a new form of authority, one that relied not on aggression, but on empathy, patience, and understanding. Students began seeking her guidance, observing how she interacted with the cubs and learning from her approach. They noted how she would never force compliance, but instead inspire it through calm confidence. They saw how she recognized the intelligence in creatures who were often treated as tools, and how she nurtured loyalty rather than demanding it. The cubs had become living examples of this philosophy, demonstrating that strength was not always measured in force, but in trust and mutual respect. Instructors, who had once scoffed at the human girl, began to reflect on the lessons she had unintentionally taught. They saw that the effectiveness of leadership did not lie solely in fear or dominance, but in the ability to inspire and connect. The predator cub's unwavering loyalty was evidence of a principle that had long been ignored in the Academy, that understanding and compassion could achieve what intimidation could not. The human girl herself remained humble throughout. She did not boast, she did not demand recognition, and she did not flaunt the cub's loyalty. Her focus was always on calm observation, careful guidance, and quiet connection. She understood that leadership was not about seeking admiration, but about earning trust. The cubs responded to this understanding, reinforcing her authority without the need for violence or aggression. Over time, the story of that day became legend. The human girl who had been sent to be humiliated had transformed her ordeal into a demonstration of unity and leadership. The cubs' choice to align with her was retold in classrooms, discussed in lessons, and celebrated in the Academy's history. It was a story that transcended species, showing that true leadership could arise from courage, empathy, and a calm presence rather than brute force. Visitors and new students who entered the Academy were often shown the girl and the cubs as an example. They would witness the subtle interactions, a glance, a nod, a whisper, and see how the cubs responded instantly. They would watch as she moved with quiet confidence through the halls, always accompanied by her protective companions, and they would understand that authority and influence were not about fear, but about the ability to inspire loyalty and trust. Even the alien instructors who had planned the humiliation could not deny the truth. They watched silently, a mixture of astonishment and respect in their expressions. Their attempt to break her spirit had failed, and in its place, something remarkable had been forged. The human girl had created a bond, a connection that could not be commanded, but only earned. The cub's loyalty was absolute, a living testament to the power of empathy and presence. The human girl's quiet leadership continued to shape the culture of the Academy. Her influence spread beyond her interactions with the cubs, affecting the students, instructors, and even visiting dignitaries. They saw that leadership was not measured by dominance, but by the ability to connect, to inspire, and to cultivate. Loyalty through respect rather than fear. Her presence became a symbol, a reminder that the qualities of patience, compassion, and quiet strength could achieve what aggression and intimidation never could. And so, what began as a moment of mockery became a defining legend within the academy. The predator cubs had chosen a human girl as their alpha, not because she had power over them, but because she had earned their trust and respect. She had turned humiliation into unity, fear into loyalty, and ridicule into a demonstration of leadership that would be remembered for generations. The human girl, small and unassuming at first, had become a symbol of the quiet strength that could transcend species, challenge expectations, and inspire a new way of thinking. The predator cub's unwavering loyalty was a testament to her influence, and the Academy would never forget the day when a single human girl had redefined what it meant to lead. In every hall, in every classroom, the story was told and retold. Of the girl who faced ridicule without fear, of the cubs who chose to follow her, and of the lesson that true authority comes not from cruelty or intimidation, but from empathy, calmness, and unwavering presence. The human girl had become the new alpha, not just of the cubs, but of a new understanding, one that would shape the Academy forever.